Thank you so much to all of you for taking this time. It was just an idea that actually Rock and I had when we were talking, and just thought it would be a really great thing for people to kind of see each other, particularly since there are a few new ones among us, and also an opportunity to talk about a topic, that topic being how our communions do dialogue. So that's what we're going to do in hopefully this hour. And I'd like to start though first with just people telling us who you are. And so I'm Jean Hawkshurst. I'm one of the 2 ecumenical staff officers for the United Methodist Church. We serve under the oversight of Bishop Sally Dyck. And we are very, very happy that she is our overseer. And we divide things up. David Field, my colleague, and I, he does the bilateral dialogues and faith and order things. I do the multilateral dialogue, or multilateral institutions, organizations, dialogues, and then training. So that's who we are. I live in Kentucky. Our office is in Washington, D.C. I'm married to an Episcopal priest, and we have 2 adult children, one of whom is independent Christian and one is very, very conservative Baptist. So that's me. So I'm going to call on folks just as I see you in the squares. And if you would just tell us who you are, I'd really appreciate it. So Rock, I see you next.
Sure. My name's Rock Fremont. And in this past June, I was elected as the ICCC, which is the International Council of Community Churches. I was elected as their ecumenical and interreligious vice president. So essentially that makes me the ecumenical officer for our movement of community churches. And I actually have dual standing. So I am a UCC pastor as well and serve a local congregation in Phoenix, Arizona.
Thank you. Hermann.
Hermann Weinlick. I live in Minneapolis. I'm a retired pastor, function as ecumenical officer of the Moravian Church, Northern Province, of which Betsy is our executive head.
Thank you. David Field.
David Field. I'm the other ecumenical staff officer for the UMC. I just recently joined, so I'm fresh at this, responsible for theological dialogues and faith and order. I'm based in Basel, Switzerland, originally from South Africa, where I happen to be at the moment. And I'm married to a Reformed pastor, so I also have a kind of ecumenical marriage. Although my wife was at one stage also Methodist, and I was one stage a Presbyterian, so we do chop and change a little bit. Yeah, that's basically me. Looking forward to meeting you all and also dialoguing with you all over in the next couple of years.
Thank you. Thank you. Mark Pettis.
Hello, everyone. Mark Pettis. I am the Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations Manager for the United Church of Christ. And I am located now in Cleveland, Ohio. Fairly recently moved to Cleveland. We are in the midst of moving our denominational offices, which is a joy. And I am married to an ordained UCC minister who also serves on our national staff as our minister for volunteer engagement. And we have a very fun 7-year-old son who is getting his vaccine tomorrow. So,
yay! Thank you, Bishop Dyck.
I'm Sally Dyck, and I'm the ecumenical officer for the United Methodist Church, as you heard, and so I get to work with these 2 wonderful persons, plus our part-time administrative assistant. And I live in California. I'm leaving again tomorrow for Switzerland for the executive committee of the World Council of Churches. I was asked to be a proxy for someone. I'm not normally on the executive committee, but I was just there a couple of weeks ago with Rock for ecumenical officers. So we saw each other then. Welcome to all of you. Really glad that you can be on this time of learning.
Thank you. Thank you. Leao.
Yes, hello everybody. Leao Neto here. I am from Brazil, but I live and minister in the UK, where I am a connectional officer working in the conference office. Okay, I can explain the language a bit further, but I'm the assistant ecumenical officer. We have 2 ecumenical officers. Nikki, who is not here with us today, she's also the assistant secretary of conference. I have another role, which is interfaith relationships, and I'm responsible for diverse languages and cultures groups in the Methodist Church in Britain. And it's very good to be here with you.
Thank you. I'm glad you're here. Tammy.
I'm Tammy Rinker, Moravian pastor, congregational pastor, serving a congregation in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where I arrived about 1.5 years ago. Me and Corona moved in. So it has been a strange beginning in this new place. That's actually old place for me, but I'm here with my husband, and we have 3 adult children.
Excellent. Lynette, let's do the Moravians.
So my name is Lynette Delbridge. I currently serve a congregation here in Bethlehem, Central Moravian Church. I've really enjoyed my ecumenical experiences through the years. I got to teach at an American Baptist seminary and a Lutheran seminary. When I was in graduate school, I got to spend about 3 years pretending to be Episcopalian and Episcopalian worship each week. I guess, it was really a privilege to be part of the Moravian United Methodist Dialogue team. We produced the full communion agreement, and it's been interesting to see how things continue to play out and what might be possible, what needs help if we did move forward more intentionally.
So you'll be working with David now on the Moravian. Yeah. Janelle.
Hi, yes. Janelle Rice. I'm pastor at Calvary Moravian Church, which is in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And for about the last, I think, over 6 years, at least 7 years, I've been on the Moravian Episcopal Coordinating Committee, working with that group. I wish I had some ecumenical relationships to report, but I have a Moravian raised husband, and still a Moravian daughter. So
That's okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to jump down and ask for Betsy to share who she is, and then I'll come back to my normal route here.
It's a clean sweep on the Moravians here.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. So I'm Betsy Miller. I function as head of communion for the Moravian Church Northern Province and president of the Provincial Elders Conference, which is our equivalent of everybody else's council or whatever. So it's just good to be on these squares with all of you and some very dear friends from ecumenical worlds.
Thank you. Thank you. Father Nicolas, glad you are here.
So Father Nicolas Kazarian from the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America, based in New York City. 2 kids, 7 and 9, and hands full with them. Glad to be with you.
Thank you. Sergei. Sergei, could you unmute?
Sorry, Sergei Kapral, filling in for our newly departed ecumenical officer. I'm deacon at a cathedral in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. I've loved ecumenical work literally all my life.
Thank you. Uh-oh. Did you freeze? Oh dear. Are you good, Sergei?
Yeah, I'm.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Kathryn.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kathryn Lohre. I serve in the office of the presiding bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America as the executive for ecumenical and interreligious relations and theological discernment based in Chicago. So great to see some of you that I haven't seen yet in the pandemic time. So it's great to see you again.
Thank you. And I love your title is like so long. Margaret.
Hey everybody, I'm Margaret Rose, and I serve on the staff of the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church as the deputy for ecumenical and interreligious relations. Our headquarters are in New York City. I just note down in my right-hand corner that I brought also along a visitor, so you might, there's another Episcopalian here, Sal Moon in the corner there, he has not been in the ecumenical officers group before, but I'm very glad for this because Sal Moon has been a wonderful intern for us and is learning about our dialogue. And David, I look forward to working with you on our continued United Methodist Episcopal Church dialogue as well. And really glad to see so many familiar faces and new faces. So look forward to that moment of 3 dimensions or more.
Thank you. Thank you. And good introduction for Salmoon. Would you bring us home?
Hi, everyone. I am Salmoon Bashir, originally from Pakistan, but now in Atlanta, Georgia, at Candler School of Theology, finishing my final year of MDiv. I married to an Georgian Eastern Orthodox who is not planning to be anytime soon to be a priest or going towards that. And yeah, but I am in the ordination track in the Episcopal Church. Jean, we have a common friend, Vivian Ruth Sawyer.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah, and she always talk about you. So, but I'm very glad.
Please tell her I said hello. And for everyone's benefit, Vivian does a website and help me with the name of it. It's Consortium of Christian Unity, right? That just posts Christian unity things from several different directions. So is it a Facebook page? Yes, it is a Facebook page. So if you wanted to look up Consortium of Christian Unity, that might be another interesting new venue. So the topic of our conversation for today is simply bilateral dialogues or dialogues for the benefit of some of the new folks, just so we can talk through and maybe understand each other's terms and things like that. For lack of a better way to do this, I thought that we might just start by talking through how the Methodists do it, the United Methodists do it, and then you guys can tell us how we're wrong or how we should fix things or how you do it differently. I hope that's okay to do it that way. So I'll do that for just a few minutes, asking for David and Bishop's input, and then just whoever wants to talk after that about how differently you all do it. I think it'll be an interesting conversation, and I'll be very, very brief. So dialogues, at least from the point of view of the United Methodist Church, have as their goal full communion, the hope of full communion. And in the United Methodist Church, the Council on Bishops has the responsibility for inviting and entering into dialogues and into ecumenical organizations. But then it's the General Conference, our communion-wide gathering, that has the responsibility for affirming and ratifying any full communion relationships after the dialogues get to that place. We consider that there are 2 kinds of dialogues, multilaterals, and these are the kinds that are among more than 2 communions or faiths or religions. And we also use that term multilateral for organizations, like the World Council of Churches would be a multilateral organization. Bilaterals then are those dialogues that involve 2 communions or faiths or religions. And full communion being the ultimate goal, we define full communion as a relationship that exists between or among communions that agree to recognize each other as members of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church as described in the scripture and historic creeds. They agree to recognize the authenticity of each other's sacraments and welcome each other to partake in the Eucharist. They affirm the authenticity of each church's ministry and recognize the validity of each other's offices of ministry. Those are the requirements for a full communion relationship that happens sometimes after years and years and years of dialogue. And then once a full communion relationship is realized, then the communions agree to several things as well. They agree to partner in mission and ministry, to be together visible witnesses of unity, to continue to allow for differences and distinctions between or among them, so long as those are not church dividing differences or distinctions. They share the visible unity at all levels of the church, including local communities, regional organizations, and denominationally. They cannot modify or change the doctrine or discipline or standards of the United Methodist Church, and they remain in this full communion relationship until, at least in our case, our General Conference says so. Commissions are what happens when a full communion relationship is realized, and those commissions work to carry out that relationship and those commitments that are made. So in a nutshell, I think that's who we are and how we do it. David or Bishop, did I leave anything out? Okay.
You covered most of it, Jean. Sorry, Bishop.
Go ahead, David.
I was going to say, I'm still new at this and finding out exactly what I've got to do. So that is a helpful summary for me as well. But I think at the moment, yeah, I mean, we have 6 ongoing dialogues. Somewhere we have a full communion agreements and others where we are working towards that. And so that's the present state of affairs.
Yeah, and one of those 6 would be the Pan-Methodist agreement, which contains 5 others. So yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah, and because my office rotates every 4 years or so, we really haven't started any new ones for a while now, and we hope that might change, especially now, given maybe we can begin to meet in person as well as by Zoom.
And we're very hopeful that the next ratified full communion relationship will be with the Episcopal Church, and we hope that will happen in 2024. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. How do you all do it? Anybody?
Well, I'll speak up for the Moravians. Certainly our general declaration within our book of order is that our goal is that says the Moravian Church has always advocated the unity of Christ's followers, desiring ever the fulfillment of the prayer of our Lord that they all may be one. And so Moravians are in full communion relationship with the Lutherans for the longest, then the Episcopalians, and then United Methodists. We have formulas of agreement with the PCUSA and other Reformed churches, but that is less codified, as it were. I would suggest, and I don't want to speak for everybody, so we have bilateral folks represented here, and then Hermann, of course, is our pan representative. That's probably the best way I could describe it. Hermann is in relationship with all peoples of all faiths of all worlds. So I'll leave it at that. I'm trying to get him to smile there. But I think, for the Moravians, we have somewhat chafed under the bilateral moniker. We would rather have tri and quadra or multi. And sometimes I get frustrated that it's only, my geometry was if A equals B and B equals C, then why can't A equal A, B, C, D, E, and F, sort of. But I long for that day, and yet am patient on the journey with the polity of others. Herman, you probably have a way more wiser way of expressing that.
The only thing I would add, I don't want to minimize bilateral or trilateral or anything else, but the most significant things have happened from the bottom up, not the top down.
And I do think the bilateral, multilateral conversation is very important. It's a good topic because we do it differently.
Maybe it's fitting for me to go next as a representative of the chafing. The Lutherans, we follow a pretty similar path to what you summarized, Jean. And when I stop talking, I'll put some links in the chat that may just be helpful reference points. But our commitment has always been to bilateral dialogue. So even with our agreement with the formula of agreement, which is Lutherans, Presbyterians, UCC, Reformed Church in America, we understand that as a bilateral because it's Lutheran Reformed. So the traditions are bilaterally facing there. The reason why we are committed to that is because we have found that it creates the most depth of mutual understanding, and the characteristics of full communion can be most richly satisfied. However, I think there's an interesting question to raise at this juncture in the life of several full communion agreements, not just with the ELCA, but of course that we all represent, and then beyond this configuration, which is once you get to a certain point in a landscape of full communion agreements, does the geometry question need to be raised again? And I do believe it is, although there are Lutherans who would say never forsake the bilateral. So that's a wrestling point with us. We are really committed to multilateral engagement in conciliar spaces. We have, as some of you know, because you witnessed it up close and personal, we have pulled out of other efforts or never entered into other efforts that either began as or evolved into multilateral efforts seeking full communion. For us, all efforts that we agree to toward full communion, or all dialogue for us technically means that we and our partners agree that we're on a journey toward full communion, so that we name that end goal as part of our commitments to enter in. We call something we call things that have different goals that could be common mission or common mystery, a discourse. And those are just our technical terms. Our average people in the pew have no idea what that distinction is or why it matters. So that's just, just to name the obvious. But yeah, I think I just want to underscore our approach is bilateral, but I think we're now in a place of thinking about things differently. And for us, that's really pronounced in our resumed dialogue with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, because they are full communion partners with the UCC, and so are we. So what do we make of that? And what are the dimensions of those two longstanding full communion relationships that are powerfully deep, that can benefit the third part of the triangle in that instance, and perhaps there are other shapes that come out of other configurations. Thanks.
Maybe I'll follow the ELCA as one of our full communion partners, and the Moravian Church as our other full communion partner. The Episcopal Church has, is that okay, Jean? I just sort of went right in there, sorry. The Episcopal Church has, in addition to these two full communion partners, 3 current bilateral dialogues, meaning with the Anglican, with the Roman Catholic Church, with the United Methodist Church. We hope in 2024 will become a full communion agreement, and also with the Presbyterian Church. But there are, I'll say 2 things. One is we have other full communion partners that come from our historical relationships, the Philippine Independent Church, for example, in the Philippines, the Church of Sweden, the Mar Thoma Church, and others, which our relationships have have been somewhat volatile over the years, but continue to be important partnerships. I'd like to say something that follows up what Kathryn said about the sort of possibilities of expanding these full communion relationships. One piece of that has been the ELCA and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada and the Anglican Church of Canada and the Episcopal Church. And the Episcopal Church is the fourth leg or the fourth wheel, I guess, of what we hope will be a common full communion arrangement with something called Churches Beyond Borders. And I know that the Moravian Church, for example, is in deep conversation with those churches as well. So again, that raises that much larger question about how we engage together. And then the last thing is just to say that I am pretty sure, I hope anyway, that COVID and the pandemic are helping the Episcopal Church to look at our partnerships in new ways. Already, there are several churches that are sharing property and they're sharing worship space, and officially they are not full communion churches. But there's one, for example, in Spokane that I'd love to connect with you, Bishop Jacob, around. An Episcopal bishop is wanting to make something happen there. And I just think we're trying to look at the different ways that what we call historic episcopate, locally adapted, can allow us to expand our vision and the possibility of working together. We're also trying to have some conversations with Pentecostals and Baptists in new ways. And I think that's an important piece of this work. Some of us call this receptive ecumenism, but I'll leave it at that. But I think we're expanding, and I'm hopeful about these possibilities.
I tend to be one of the newer people around the table, and so I'm here as much to learn as to share, probably more to learn. But I would say that I would echo much of what has been said in terms of approach. I know that we also have some relationships with like the Alliance of Baptists, in addition to our full communion partners, that are slightly different in flavor. But we also, one of the things that I'm interested in looking at in particular is what our more formal relationships are with the United and Uniting churches around the globe, because they're, we have much in common, but whether or not we have formal agreements is pretty much, that's the question. And so looking at how we pursue some of that work is something I'm particularly interested in at this time, as well as some of the other conversations that I hope will get started in the not too distant future.
If you don't mind, I will jump in. Thank you, Jean. So for the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese and for the Ecumenical Patriarchate, let's say the motto has been put together by Patriarch Athenagoras in the 1960, when he said to Pope Paul VI, let's get together and meet. So dialogue is really about meeting one another, and the dialogue as considered by the Ecumenical Patriarchate as two legs: one dialogue of love and charity, and a dialogue of truth. The dialogue of love and charity was based on the meeting of Patriarch Athenagoras in '64 in Jerusalem with Pope Paul VI. And then the dialogue of truth is really what we call the bilateral and theological dialogue, to be able to think together about our differences, but also our commonalities, and how these articulation between the two can drive us, bring us towards full communion, but as an expression of the unity of the church and the Catholicity of the church. As a department, the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese also tries to explore new dialogues and new ways of engaging with ecumenical partners, especially with the evangelical world, the Pentecostal charismatic world, and especially in their appreciation of the early experience or the experience of the early church and how we can connect through the teaching of the church fathers and this original experience. So that's about it for me. Thank you.
I'll jump in. Since I'll follow another Orthodox. I didn't mention the fact I'm part of the Orthodox Church in America. For Orthodox, it's pure unity, full communion and unity into one church. An example that in the States, well, now it's been many years, recent history for Orthodox, there was a group, a national evangelical group that on their own studied the fathers, studied theology, changed their theology and called themselves Evangelical Orthodox. There was a bilateral dialogue with them, and the agreement was made to become one church. For Orthodox, you're under one bishop. You can't really have two bishops in the same place, even though we've done it. Their bishops ceased to be bishops. For an Orthodox, you have to be monastic to be a bishop. Their clergy were reordained, but were in full communion and they're part of an archdiocese. You could say for the Orthodox, this is extreme, but that basically is the way we operate. Full union and full communion on those terms.
A comment I would make is that with the exception of within the Methodist family and Rock's relation with the ICCC, we have no predominantly non-white denominations involved in any of our conversations.
Do you have a puppy with you, Herman?
I think the dog was agreeing with, lamenting the absence of white members in these conversations.
That's right. That's right. Leao, yes, please.
Would you like to hear a bit of a flavor from the other side of the pond? Perhaps a bit about the European side of things. Methodism here, of course. And in Britain, we have Methodist Roman Catholic Dialogue Group Commission that mirrors very much the structure and the work and the timings of the Roman Catholic Methodist International Dialogue Commission. That's a cycle, a cycle of quinquennium dealing with a particular theme and producing reports, etc. So there's a dialogue going on for over 50 years now. The Methodist Church, the Methodist Council, and within Britain, I can't remember how many years we've been in dialogue. But dialogue takes many forms and shapes, and that I would like to say here in our context. One is this formality of a bilateral dialogue between the Roman Catholic Church and the Methodist Church. There's some noise there. Am I interfering? People can hear me all right, can they? Okay, I'll continue. There's a little noise in the background. I don't know if it's coming from Sergei. Is that you there? I don't know. So I mentioned already that the World Methodist Council has also bilateral dialogues. Perhaps Jean would like to talk more on that because she's on the Methodist Roman Catholic Dialogue Commission there. but also we had dialogues with Salvation Army, the Anglican Church, the Baptist Church, and so on. In the UK, in Great Britain, the conversation takes different forms, as I said. So with the Anglicans, Methodist Church in Britain has been in a covenant relationship since 2003. They are trying to sort out kind of interchangeability of ministries, a full interchangeability of ministries. That has happened in Ireland, but that's what we are working on at the moment. It goes on a very slow pace, but we have some hope to achieve it. Of course, when you are close and you think you have resolved some issues and you are close to it, then something else pops around and makes it more difficult. In our case here, more recently, the Methodist Church in Great Britain has taken some decisions, resolutions on marriage and relationships, about divorce, cohabitation, and same-sex marriages that have postponed a bit the negotiations about interchangeability of ministries, as you'd appreciate. I can respond to questions if you want. So that's with the Anglican Church, the Roman Catholic Church I spoke. In more general terms, Methodist Church in Britain is a member of the Communion of Protestant Churches in Europe. And that's a way in which we have fellowship of pulpit and table in the language of the Communion for Protestant Churches in Europe. You can investigate that in the website. It's very interesting. How we are working towards being communion with one another, recognize each other. It has grown from a Lutheran Reformed tradition into Methodists are part of it and other churches. And there's a council where we have these agreements that allow for fellowship of pulpit and table. I hope that's clear enough so far. And then there's work that we do to advance our relationships. So they, in practical terms, to the church together in England, we have several agreements in place for local ecumenical partnerships. So model constitutions, sharing agreements based on an act of the parliament here, 1969 act of parliament for church buildings to be shared. Have all the scheme for churches to work together locally on local ecumenical partnerships, from constitution to sharing agreements, and we manage that. Methodism has around 600 local ecumenical partnerships. Around 28,000 members of the Methodist Church are in local ecumenical partnerships. Over 200,000 membership church, for you to have an idea of numbers there. So that's practical work as a daily work that we engage with, that allows for relationships, bilateral, multilateral, be very practical at a local level. And of course, we participate in the organizations, WCC, etc. And we have support together, Methodist Ecumenical Office in Rome. Perhaps I should stop here, but to give you, I hope to have given you a little flavor of what is going on this side of the pond.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for representing that side of the pond, Leao. So, I see that my friend Bishop Leith has joined us. Welcome, welcome. So we have gone around and introduced ourselves and then just shared a little bit about how our particular communion does dialogues. So, and please.
Thank you. I apologize for my tardiness. Hello to everyone. I think I can say we don't do dialogues very well. It's real easy. The only thing that is more dysfunctional than the Democrats in the U.S. Congress are probably the bishops of the AME Church. And usually for the same reasons. We are just a click away from agreeing on something, and it makes it very difficult. So I say that to say that often the ecumenical officer steps out and takes some liberty, which may or may not be confirmed. But I'm also hoping that in the next few years that the dialogue can be shared within our own camp in such a way that there can be greater consensus and understanding. People who are involved in ecumenical work, as I quoted to someone today, we all learn something from the relationships that we develop with others in other communions. We learn things about ourselves, we learn things about others. And so I'm hoping to create a forum which currently does not exist within the denomination, so that these issues and dialogues might take place in-house and better equip us to express ourselves when we are in communion and fellowship with others with some more confidence.
I understand what you are saying, Bishop. So do you all have questions for each other, since we've done this this kind of brief overview of how we do things? Or do you have questions for each other?
Jean, perhaps before, maybe I'll just follow up on something that Leo mentioned about the community of Protestant churches in Europe, which is an interesting example of a multilateral full communion agreement, which the UMC in Europe is part of, and I think it's slightly irregularly part of in terms of the discipline, because it's never been approved by the General Conference with some strange things. Anyway, the community of Protestant churches in Europe grew out of the 1972, I think the 73 agreement called the Leuenberger Agreement between Lutherans and Reformed churches to recognize that there was no longer the Reformation debates on communion no longer divided them. And then that was gradually, so that was most of the major Lutheran and Reformed denominations in Europe. And that was then expanded to include some of the other historic churches, the Hussites in Czechoslovakia, the Moravian Church as another international church, the Waldensians in Italy. And then in 97, the various Methodist churches joined. That's the UMC Central Conferences in Europe, the Methodist Church of Ireland, the Methodist Church of Great Britain. And so effectively, we have a full communion agreement within Europe. Interestingly enough, with some churches from the UMC perspective, who we don't have full communion agreements with in their branches in the USA or their relatives in the USA. So we had effectively in Europe a full communion with the Moravians long before we had a full communion officially at a general conference level in the US context. So, but that's an interesting example of where a kind of multilateral agreement, but with full communion. And so it's interesting from the UMC point of view, because there we have an agreement with Reformed churches, while at the general conference level and the US level, we have no connection with the Reformed or Presbyterian denominations.
Thank you. That is interesting. Yeah, Margaret.
I'd love to follow up on that, and David, perhaps even a longer conversation at some point, just to say that the Episcopal Church has expanded some of its full communion agreements. I mentioned before the Church of Sweden, but currently some dialogue, not exactly in the same official capacity, but nevertheless official, with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Bavaria, for example, because of our convocation of churches in Europe. So there's an interesting sort of side province or side group of the Episcopal Church, even though it's an international church, but this particular convocation of churches in Europe has some interesting, I think, conversations that might aid us in thinking about our joint full communion agreement as time goes on.
Excellent. Yeah, Kathryn, please.
I want to go back to the geometry, if I might. One of the conversations that Bishop Eaton and I have quite often is about, and this relates to the geometry, but it's not the geometry. I want to be very clear. The questions that we're struggling with are around sustainability of this model of ecumenism. And I mean that in a very basic way, a financial sustainability. A couple of weeks ago, I was asked by one of our synod bishops for an estimate for what full communion costs. And I actually took out a piece of paper and tried to sketch out just some real general ideas. If you take any one of our full communion agreements and you think about the 3 or 4 decades of dialogue that preceded it, and then you think about all of the other pieces surrounding that had to do with other relationships, it just becomes it really becomes a complicated scenario quite quickly. And we're sort of conscious of the fact that the 6 full communion agreements that we currently have are at a depth of relationship that is exciting, but that demands more at a time when not only are financial resources limited, but staff capacity is also quite limited. And then how do we faithfully add more to that scenario at the same time when we don't necessarily even have the financial capacity to commit to launching new dialogues, knowing that for us that is a journey toward full communion. So I'm sorry to raise that very crass issue around financial sustainability, but I think it's a real factor that we haven't spoken about directly within the ecumenical movement to the degree that we need to. And I certainly don't want that to be the first reason for deciding a particular pathway over another pathway. But I think that it does bring us into the possibility of some creative thinking about new kinds of spaces for ecumenical engagement and dialogue. That then circles back to the geometry Betsy mentioned earlier. And Bishop Leith, that reference to geometry has to do with, does one full communion partner and another full communion partnership have any relationship if there's a shared full communion partner? So if A plus B and B plus C, then what is A and C? What is that relationship? So.
Kathryn, you've raised not geometry, but basic math. And yeah, I mean, can we? Yeah.
Good point.
And so part of the question that you bring up is, how can we fulfill Christ's call that we're all one in ways that are less formal and Hermann has left, are from the ground up?
Well, I'll just pop in and say, Kathryn, thank you for that point exactly. Coming into my role after someone like Hermann Weinlick has occupied this seat for 20 plus years, just conversations with Hermann on what does a bilateral conversation, what does that journey even look like? And that's what led to Jean and I having a conversation about what this meeting might look like, because that's something that I'm really interested in. But we only have 2 people on staff. Our national office only has 2 people on staff. So what would that journey look like for someone like the International Council of Community Churches for us? So I was hoping that, that today might help connect some of those dots for me, but I think I'm leaving with more questions.
Well, and maybe this is the beginning of more conversation, but Bishop, please leave.
I have a question. So in the math or geometry, whichever you want to you want to call it, if A has relationship with B and B has relationship with C, does A have relationship with C? Does C declare positively that they don't have relationship? And one of the reasons this is easy on my end is we tend not to be quite so particular. It would be a rare situation where someone would be barred, say, from Eucharist, almost unheard of, because we have an open table. So I'm curious about who's keeping the list, because for us, we would assume that if we were accepted by A and A is in relationship with C, that C would just accept us without asking the question, even though we might not have been in dialogue or had an official word.
Fascinating question. Anybody want to try to answer?
Well, you're singing my song, Bishop Pencil.
It would seem like to me, at the very least, a relationship A and B, B and C, then A and C could start a conversation with each other with a lot of the groundwork already done, so that it could be a much more efficient conversation. I have to say that the Moravian Methodist conversation, we had 3 meetings in person. It was very easy because we already agreed on shared communion and we already recognized each other's clergy. So we just needed to fill in the dots and say, let's celebrate what is already true. So perhaps A and C could sit down and say, let's just fill in the dots.
Almost, so the Moravian Church Northern Province and the AME could chat.
We could sing and dance, actually.
Thank you for your passion.
I think that the scenario that you've laid out, Bishop Leith, it's such a great question for our time. And I don't think anyone would say that common mission isn't possible in that scenario. I guess, trying to faithfully represent the Lutherans, I would probably have to, point back to some of the theological differences that have not been resolved, and that are really, really important to who we are and how we understand God and ourselves. But that doesn't preclude common mission. That doesn't preclude, some of those other pieces that we're already actively engaged in. And where we're getting into some challenging areas is when our pastors on the ground they're not waiting for the national church bodies to bless or even grant permission to what they're doing. And then we're trying to clean it up on the other side. And it creates not only the tension with ecumenical partners, but the internal tension. And that, I think, is a shared experience. I saw nodding heads anyway. So I think there are some of those pieces that we can certainly affirm. Yes, absolutely. That's not a question. And then it's the theological dialogue on some of those more divisive historical issues that presents the challenge.
One quick thing to add to that before we go. I mean, the last document that the Churches Uniting in Christ did put together, which was not a full communion document, but it was one which declared at least that the 9 or 11 members shared, there was a mutual recognition of ministries. There was a mutual recognition of Eucharistic hospitality, for example. And that was perhaps a step along the way, but certainly not far enough in the orderly exchange of clergy and all of these particular things. Perhaps the shared mission and ministry is a place to begin. And I know that the Episcopal Church has been a staunch gatekeeper for far too long about too many things. So I certainly claim that, and would be very glad for that, those walls to come down.
I need to go here in a second, but before I do, I just wanted to be able to say that I think this is a really helpful conversation, and that these and probably a few more on this call are significant players in terms of how this really does go forward. I think Kathryn's comments about what's sustainable going forward, but not just financially, even some of the ways in which we interact with each other's gatherings and those kinds of things. I mean, I think this might be a good group to at least talk through some of that. I'll just put it out there. I wouldn't mind having a conversation in the next few months about what do we do with gatherings? What's the best way to recognize ecumenism at our annual or whatever gatherings, quadrennial gatherings? What is sustainable in that regard? And what are some other ideas? We're challenged because as a general conference, we've been scheduled right smack dab in the middle of the World Council of Churches Assembly, and they presently have us exactly in the middle of the assembly. We're hoping they'll change that. But all of these raise questions, and all of that is to say that I think this group and maybe some others with us are the ones to really think those things through. So thank you for your time. As I said, I need to go, but I really appreciate it. And thank you, Jean, for following up on this.
Sure, and thank you, Bishop. And that's a really good transition. Just as a kind of pulling it all together, I heard us talking about the differences in focus in our different groups between bilateral and multilateral. I heard us talking about bilaterals moving to multilaterals. I heard us talking about who will invite whom for what next, internal dialogues, and the differences within our communions. We haven't talked about interreligious dialogue and how we do that. We've talked about financial sustainability. We've talked about being creative. We've talked about ground up movements, and we've talked about church-wide ecumenical representation. So there's a lot on the table now, and we have to end this call because we promised it would be around an hour. But would you like to come back together again and continue the conversation, as Bishop Dyck said, sometime within the next few months? I'm seeing 1, 2 nodding heads. How about if I'll issue the invitation and we'll see what happens. But truly, thank you all for your input. I do think we're leaving with as many questions as we may have come with, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I do think it's a good thing for us to talk. So, so thank you. God bless you, and we'll invite each other back together again sometime soon.
Thank you, Jean, for bringing us together. God bless.
Thanks, Jean.
Nice to see you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.